If you'd like to get early access to more videos like this and help decide what you'd like to see next, please consider joining the Patreon. The link is in the description. Hello everyone. Today's research video is about Duck, one of my favourite characters, and so this has been a real pleasure to put together. It has taken me over 7 years of off-again, on-again research to get this information ready, and I think I'm right in saying the highest number of books I've had to buy to get evidence so far. Well, it's finally here, so let's just jump straight in, shall we? We've known for years that the number worn on Duck's number plate in the railway series, 5741, is not the real number he would have worn on the mainland, and so I've been trying to find out what his real number would have been and where the real engine worked before he came to Sodor and became the North Western's number 8. The number 5741 was applied to Wilbur Awdry's model of Duck, but it did not originally carry this number. The Gaiety model which Duck was built from was originally numbered 5700, and as this number was moulded onto the side of the tanks, it was the number carried by all the Gaiety pannier tank models. This number would have been filed off by Wilbert and repainted with a bow pen or fine paint. For some reason 5741 was chosen as the running number for this model, and this carried over to the books. Before we go any further, I have a theory about why the number 5741 was chosen for the model. Duck was originally a spare engine, and was often used by Wilbur's children when they wanted to play with an engine on the Reverend's layout, rather than the models who ran the layout such as Thomas, Edward and Percy. The children were the ones to come up with the nickname Duck, as the model originally had one lopsided wheel which would make the engine waddle as it ran around the track. The nickname stuck, and Duck he remained, even after his waddle was fixed. One of Wilbert's children, Veronica Chambers, was born in 1941. So it seems to me that it's possible that she was the specific child who originally christened the engine Duck, and in tribute the engine's number was taken from the year of her birth. That's just a theory though, so let's return to some cold hard facts. There were in total 863 5700s built for the Great Western Railway, and all survived to run on British railways, making them one of the most numerous classes of all engines in Britain. There were however several other Great Western and British Railways classes of pannier tank, one of which was a 6400 class, which Duck was incorrectly illustrated as in his first two appearances in Percy the Small Engine and the 8 Famous Engines. Other classes of pannier tanks varied in appearance, but all had the distinctive tanks on the side of the boiler rather than along the running board. Some were smaller like the 1366 class, have open clouds like the 2721 class, tanks that stop before the smoke box like the 9400s, and outside cylinders like the 1500 class. However, the 5700 class had several subclasses with appearances sometimes as varied as these other classes, and so these can help us reduce the number from 863 examples. The 8750 subclass were built with a larger cab and different side window designs. The spectacle plates were also updated to have square windows. The 9700 subclass had condensing equipment for use in London that made them look very different to the other panniers in their class. There were also the 6700 subclass that were only built with 3-link couplings, and so could only be used for shunting and some freight workings. During the Second World War, some examples were also fitted with spark arrestor chimneys, though these were replaced in peacetime. So, out of 863 engines, the subclasses can all be disregarded, which leaves 300 engines. Christopher Awdry reveals in the 1993 annual that Duck was built in Swindon. The Great Western Railway used other locomotive companies to help build engines at the time of Duck's building, as there were interest-free government loans available to try to boost the economy and to try and get people back into work during the Great Depression. Of these 300 potential 5700s, 100 were built by the North British Locomotive Company in Glasgow, 25 by Kerr Stewart in Stoke-on-Trent, 55 by W.G. Bagnall in Stafford, 25 by the Yorkshire Engine Company in Sheffield, 25 by Armstrong Whitworth in Newcastle, 25 by Bear Peacock in Manchester, and 100 built by Swindon. The 100 Swindon engines can also be reduced by excluding any engine built after 1929, as reading between the lines states Duck was built in this year. This means Duck is one of the 34 engines built in 1929 in Swindon. These engines were numbered 5750 to 5784. It's interesting to note that the number Duck wears, 5741, was built in Scotland, not Swindon. To narrow down these 34 engines, we have to look at where they were shedded. Duck states that he worked at Paddington in the 1986 annual and the 8 famous engines. The shed that serves Paddington is called Old Oak Common, so the real Duck must have been allocated here at some point. Again, 5741 is different from Duck in this regard, as it never worked at Paddington, spending its whole working life around South Wales. There are 21 of our possible 5700 class engines that shedded at Old Oak Common at any time. To further narrow them down, we need to look at a few technical details seen on Duck in the illustrations. Let's start with the tank steps. These steps are seen on the front of the tank and were updated from a flat plate over time to one with ridges on the side so the worker's foot doesn't slip off. Duck arrives with the old version of these and carries them until small railway engines, when they are updated to the new design. After Edwards and Hodges' tenure as illustrator, Spong does give both old and new styles depending on the illustration, but I think we can agree he probably arrived with the old style steps, with them probably later being updated at Grosvenor Gate. One of our possible 21 engines already had the new style by the time Duck arrived on Sodor, so it is not that engine. We also know that Duck arrived in British Railways black, but was repainted into his former Great Western livery by the Fat Controller. 2 engines had the wrong livery in that case, as they still carried their Great Western livery all the way through to 1955, so these engines can be excluded too. Now comes a big one, the boiler. We know Duck does not have a top feed on his boiler, and although engines on the mainland would swap boilers when they went for overhaul, it's likely that once he was sold, Duck will keep the same boiler. This was certainly the case with the 5700s, sold by British Railways to London Transport and the National Coal Board, as these kept their boilers throughout their private owner lives. Although Duck is incorrectly illustrated in his first 2 appearances, his lack of a top feed is a constant throughout these illustrations and beyond. 3 of the 18 remaining engines had the correct boiler without a top feed in 1955, when Duck was sold to the North Western Railway. Finally, Duck is shown to have an injector pipe that goes through his running board rather than over it. Only one of the remaining 3 engines has the correct injector pipe setup, so we have found our Duck. Duck's real number is 5753, and he was built as part of Lot 258. He entered service on the 3rd of June 1929, initially allocated to Old Oak Common. He moved to Southall in 1934 and moved on to Brecon in 1935. He returned to Southall in 1937 and moved again back to Old Oak Common in 1939. He stayed at Old Oak Common throughout the war, and in 1945 he returned for a 3rd stay in Southall before being sold to the North Western Railway in 1955. It seems likely that Duck arrived on Sodor around May or June of that year, as the sun is still coming through the windows at Tidmouth at 6:30 in the afternoon in Duck Takes Charge. Like Boko, Duck is based on a real engine who moved to Sodor before their real-life engine was withdrawn. In the case of the real 5753, this was 4 years after Duck moved to Sodor in September 1959. Luckily, Duck is a member of a numerous class of engine, and his work could have been taken over by many of his fellow classmates, so British Railways would not have missed him too much. Checking this engine against some of the other information we know about Duck all works out. Duck says he knew King James I when he worked at Paddington in James and the diesel engines. I checked this against the time both King James I and 5753 were at Paddington, and they would have definitely worked together. Duck had also not met City of Truro before he brings the rail tour to Sodor in Duck and the diesel engine. 5753 and City of Truro only shared 2 years working on the Great Western before City of Truro was withdrawn between 1929 and 1931. For all of this time, 5753 was working in and around London, while City of Truro was in the Midlands, so they would not have known each other. Withdrawals of the 5700 started in 1956, with some being sold off to London Transport and later on to the National Coal Board. Duck's sale in 1955 is a little earlier than these, but still very possible, especially considering Dr. Beeching's reports and the 1955 modernisation plan. It should also be noted that 5753 was allocated to Southall sheds in 1955, alongside 19 other 5700s, as well as a variety of other tank engines, so there were plenty of engines to take over any work Duck would be abandoning. By the time Duck was sold to the North Western, he would likely have travelled over 500,000 miles. We know there are inaccuracies in the illustrations of Duck in the first 2 books, some of which are apparent on the Gallatin model I mentioned earlier, such as the square cab windows and green paint on the tank fronts and cab rear. Although the cab windows were corrected, the green paint endured even into the correct 5700 style illustrations from Duck and the Diesel engine onwards. So even now, Duck's livery differs from the official Great Western one, which has black tank fronts and a cab back. When Duck arrived on Sodor, he was originally painted British Railways black with the early crest. This is not shown in the book, but is recorded by Wilbur. After the trouble he got into with repainting Henry in the earlier books, it was probably best not to confuse readers with the livery change in Duck's debut appearance, but having him sharpen the livery he would wear for the rest of his life on the North Western Railway. On Sodor, Duck is auto-fitted, allowing him to work with his auto coaches Alice and Mirabel as a push-pull train. Although no 5700s were auto-fitted on the Great Western or British Railways, several engines who were not initially auto-fitted were later given auto-train equipment, including 15 examples of the 4575 Prairie tanks, which were auto-fitted as late as 1953. There is one other physical feature Duck has that is not shared with other 5700s, as Duck carries two extended sandboxes on his running plate either side of his smokebox. No 5700 class ever had these. Their sandboxes were entirely below the running board. However, Duck is shown with them from the 8 famous engines onwards, except in Stepney the Bluebell engine when they are absent. Wilbert's model of Duck is also missing these sandbox extensions. I think they may have originally been added to the illustrations as a different type of pannier tank, which did carry them, may have been used as the basis of an illustration and the feature stuck around. They were carried by some earlier types of pannier tank, which would have also had the early style of cab windows that Duck has, such as the 1076 class, 1661 class, and the 655 class. Alternatively, these could have been identified by Audrey as a modification he wanted Duck to have, and the fact that they were found on older panniers could be attributed to the Topham Hatt's association with the Great Western Railway. There are, however, a couple of features that Duck is not shown with, such as the fireman's side cab steps. These were a later addition to the 5700 class, but one he would have carried before coming to Sodor. It's possible they were removed at Craven's Gate, or just omitted from the illustrations as a minor feature. The whistle shield which Duck would have worn on the mainland is also absent in the illustrations. There is a slight inconsistency with how Duck's cab handrails are illustrated. He is almost always shown with the newer style cab handles he would have worn when coming to Sodor, except in Stepney the Bluebell engine, and a few limited other illustrations. I think we can say that these are all just artistic errors, and he definitely has the new style of cab handrails. Stepney the Bluebell engine is also the only book in which Duck is drawn properly to leave out his tank front steps. One last point is about Duck's real name, Montague. I haven't managed to find out anything that this is a reference to, so my best guess is that it is a very posh name that suits a member of the establishment, and so it juxtaposes humorously with Duck, a short, strange name for an engine. And that is what I've managed to find out about Duck, everyone's favourite pannier tank. Thank you for watching, everyone. I'd love to hear what you thought about this project, as it is one I've come back to so many times over the years, and it's great to finally have it finished and ready for people to see. Let me know below any other ideas you have about Duck, and don't forget to let me know who you'd like to see next. Please consider subscribing to the Patreon like these fine folk to help pick the next video subject, get early access to new content, and help support the channel.